Hello everyone. Now we look at another game from the ninth round of the Tata Steel Masters Tournament of 2024. This is played between Maksudlu and Warmerdam. It starts with d4, d5, c4 and e6, knight c3 and c5. It's the Tara's defense of the Queen's Gambit declined. C takes d5, c takes d4, queen takes d4 and knight c6, queen to d1, e takes d5, and queen takes d5. Black gives up a pawn in this variation. Queen c7 and knight f3. Knight to f6, queen to d3, and bishop e6. We'll see that it's slightly easier for black to develop his pieces. That's why a pawn was given up. e3 now. a6, preventing any knight b5. Knight to g5, but a knight b4, hitting the queen. Queen to b1 and bishop to c4. Well, probably best is just to kick that knight away, so forcing black to exchange, and after rook takes f1 or king takes f1, knight c6, the position would be equal. This would be the way to play, but knight eg4 was played, and this is not as precise because black castled here, and the rook is on d file, so knight into f6, spoiling the pawn structure, and g takes, and bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, and queen e4. Exchanging queens, queen takes, knight takes, f5 first, pushing the knight away, and knight to g3, and now finally knight c2 check. It's not a whole rook, it's in the exchange, and we'll see how. After king e2, knight takes a1, and bishop d2. There is no way to save the knight, because if knight to c2, then rook c1. This is not very good, so simply after bishop d2, bishop g7. But black is certainly much better because of winning the exchange. Rook takes a1, f4 first. Rook d5 was also a way to save the pawn. After rook c1, king b8, this is fine. Even if you don't grab the b pawn, you can play rook to c8 and try to exchange pieces. If the rook exchange is declined, then rook c2 would be very annoying. So this would be the way to go, but f4 in any case, and knight f5. Bishop takes b2 and rook b1. Bishop to a3, e takes f4, rook h2 e8. Black is in control. Bishop e3 here. A lot of ways to continue, which retain the advantage. b5 is an option. Just start to push those pawns, and let's say king f3, getting out of the pin, rook to d7, defending those loose pawns there. Rook b3, for instance, then bishop f8. g4, starting in advance, but b4, and slowly we'll see that whatever white may try to do, you will get the advance of a5 in, and then a4, and try to create a passed pawn. This is the way to go. There's another way, is rook to e4. Simply, you may want to double up later on, but let's say knight h6, going after the pawn, rook d7, knight to g4, rook to d6, king to f3, and rook a4. We'll go after the a pawn perhaps. Knight to e5 and simply f6. And everything is defended nicely. This is also a way. In the game, black played bishop to f8, which is not as strong. For the moment, what it does is that the bishop is a little hemmed in because of the knight placement, and we see this relation between the bishop and the knight, that if they're apart, they have a gap of 2 squares in between, then they control each other, but the knight is more centralized and the bishop is in the corner. So it's not very favorable for the bishop. But king f3 here was an option. b5 now, and then g4, rook to e6 and h4, start a pawn storm, and let's see who's faster. Rook to c6 and h5, b4 and g5, and then a5. Black is also quite good here, no doubt about that, but I think the previous lines might have been slightly better and easier to win. But anyway, g4 was played immediately instead of king f3, and b5, and now king f3. So essentially very similar. Rook to d3, knight to g3, and rook a3. We'll go after the a pawn. b4 was also possible, just starting the advance, and if it allows knight e4, but then bishop e7, f5 and a5, A lot of ways to play this position. It's still winning. So after rook a3, knight e4, rook takes a2, knight to f6, and we'll give up the h pawn now. Here, black, for some reason, decided to play rook into e3 and give back the exchange. It wasn't necessary. Rook e7 and knight into h7, bishop to g7, perfectly fine. After f5, then bishop c3. You have two passed pawns on the queen side. This was perfectly fine, but rook into e3 is a mistake. F takes and rook into h2. Now black is up a pawn, but it's very difficult to convert this position. Knight d5, king to b7. You have to try to get the king close to the pawns, and rook c1. Bishop to d6, preventing the rook from coming to c7. e4. Rook h3. King to e2. h6. e5. Bishop to b8, controlling c7 still. And rook d1. a5. Here the important move is rook b1. Go after that pawn immediately, forcing king c7, then knight e7 comes. And after king b6, you can play knight c8 check. Just harass that black king. King to a6, knight to d6. Of course, we don't want to capture, but after we play b4 and then rook c1, it's an equal position. The king is kind of stuck. Because on a6, rook c6 check, king a7, black is not making any progress. However, after a5, Mqxd played rook a1, and this is slightly different. It allows a free move of a4 and now rook b1. And what happens is, after the same line of king c6 and knight b4 check in this case, it doesn't matter which check you give. King b6, king d2, rook to h4 was played. And the king now has a room on a5. King a5 is possible. So it's slightly further advanced, which can support the pawn push. This is the difference between rook a1 versus rook b1. Rook g3 was also possible, just hemming that king on the second rank, and then after knight d5, king a5. And we see the difference of playing rook a1 versus rook b1. But anyway, rook h4 was played, which is still fine. Knight d5, king to a5, rook to c1. If let's say knight b4 here, trying to go for that check, you have bishop to c7, knight to c6 and king a6, knight to b4 and king b7, knight to d5, bishop a5 check. This is all very, very good for black, and you can save the b pawn ultimately. This was also possible, one of the lines, but it doesn't really help. So rook c1 instead, but rook h2. a3 was also possible. You can just push that pawn. And if rook c8, bishop a7. You're trying to create a barrier between the pawn and the rook. So rook to c7, bishop d4, rook c8 and king a4. The pawn will go through. Black will have to give up that rook. But rook h2 was played, king d3, a3 now, rook to c8 and bishop a7, rook to c7 and rook h3, king e4, bishop f2, rook takes f7, bishop to c5, rook to c7 and a2, rook to c8 so that we can check on a8 and pick up that queen. So king a4 first, then e6. And here, to win, you have to play bishop to a3. So the point is that the queening cannot be stopped, and we are still keeping an eye on e7. Rook to c3, trying to lure us to play rook takes and then allow a knight check, which would fork the pawn and the king. We have a1 queen and then rook takes h3. This is all fine. We can win this position, but after e6, rook a3 was played, and this is a bit different because of rook into c5. And now we see that e6 pawn is very threatening. a1 queen, e7. There's no way to stop that pawn. All black can now hope is to give checks. King f5, queen to b1, king f6, queen e4, rook to c8, queen d4, king g6. We'll just stay away from any of the light squares which will be attractive. Queen into d5, so we don't want queen into d5 with check. We can give up the knight otherwise. This would be a draw, but after e7, Black missed one move and played queen h8. And here came the stunning reply, rook to c8. The point is that if you capture, then knight b6 forks the king and the queen, and that pawn will go through because there is no rook check. This would be very, very good for white. White will win this one. So after rook c8, queen h7 check was played. Black tried a little f5, rook to g3, but white got a queen. Rook takes g4 and king e5. And sometimes this is what happens in chess. You miss one move, one fork, and that decides the fate of the game. You can play a very good game throughout, but one move can make all the difference. Well, thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon with the next game.